is Omar. One of my jobs here, besides sitting awkwardly here for about an hour, is to help guide us through to lunch in the next 20 minutes or so. We're going to have about 10, 15 minutes of structured panel conversation and discussion. And then we have some mics strategically positioned around. So if you all have any burning questions, that will be the time to ask them. So I'm going to address these questions in terms of who finished quickest. So we'll start with Tobias. And we've heard quite a lot about this idea of resilience and also the sort of multidimensional nature of climate and what that means for spaces like the Caribbean. I know we've been pioneers with thinking about what low carbon development looks like. We have all this multidimensional vulnerability indices and stuff being worked on. So, you place a lot of emphasis on that, this idea of resilience. So what could persons interested in starting along that road to start designing and managing projects that might be attractive to green bond in the green bond market, what are ways in which they can really discreetly include those concepts of low carbon resilience low carbon resilience?
Yeah. Well, what we typically do as a first step in project development is to start with a vulnerability assessment, or look at the climate risk screening. What are the types of risk that are pertinent to the particular project site? What sort of solutions can be developed that would respond to those risks? And also implement early warning systems to understand, well, what is happening in terms of the near and the medium and long-term future affecting the project site. One aspect that I personally think is very interesting is a concept that's called adaptive planning. And this is where you don't invest into all of the, let's say, engineering aspects of making a particular infrastructure asset future climate proof, but you develop a plan on modular resilience building, where you thereby reducing the upfront costs, but still keeping the flexibility to amend or to further construct elements in the infrastructure asset that would respond to the actual situation in 5, 10, 20, 50 years. Because as we heard earlier, it's not clear where we're heading in terms of global warming, seawater level rise. So adaptive planning is a good concept to build into project design from early on.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that's also relevant in places like the Caribbean where, the science models are pretty robust and good in many instances, but we may not necessarily have space or capital to do things all at once. So we have to have that phased approach. And I think, and second in my list of finishing quickest, it was Liz. And I think that takes us to this idea of, you spoke a lot about the need for robustness of a green bond initiative, from the transparency to the data collection and so on. So in places like the Caribbean where, data robustness might, in many cases, be an issue, how does that play into the considerations of that shades of green approach, looking at local context? And how can or does S&P play a role in supporting spaces like the region to overcome some of those obstacles, maybe design processes that take into consideration those local realities?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the challenges around data, ESG data, is a huge headache for investors and market participants in the sustainable finance space, really everywhere. So I know certain regions have certain challenges, but I think investors in this space are used to data challenges and having to be principles-based and somewhat flexible with their approach on what they're looking for. So I think from S&P's perspective, we really can take kind of any data, any disclosure that the issuer is able to prepare and form an opinion on it. So what we like to see if data collection is challenging is just as much transparency as possible. So where you've had to use certain proxies, for instance, because a certain metric isn't able to be collected, or when you've had to make an assumption using, say, a regional or national baseline kind of assumption, I think there's a lot of understanding around that. It just needs to be transparent. So I would say, while data collection processes and technology is advancing, there's a lot of understanding around that. The key is just transparency and also partnerships. It was great to hear the IDB transparency platform mentioned today. So plugging into platforms and sort of partnering to kind of pool data collection expertise and disclosure is also a great strategy while processes get more evolved and sophisticated.
Great, thanks for queuing me up for the question on the transparency platform. One of the big things, big hurdles, like I did an MBA here over a decade ago. I couldn't tell you anything about a bond, and that's no fault of the institution. That's just me. And I come from an environmental nonprofit background, and even the capacity among people whose job it is to kind of know about these things, is sometimes low. And, the IDB having to work with, in many cases, states to help drive some of these, progressive developments. Could you just talk us through the transparency platform and how that might play a role in supporting movement in the region towards this type of green bond development?
Sure, thanks very much. So the transparency platform essentially is an aggregation of information that is available to all stakeholders, issuers, investors, persons that are interested in getting into this space. So it really is trying to provide information to anybody that may have an interest in this space to gather as much as they can and understand exactly challenges, opportunities, who is issuing, what's happening in their particular space or what's happening in another region that they're close to. So it really is meant to share as much information as possible, be as transparent as possible, so that persons can make the best investment decisions as they go forward. Now, it's not the only platform for information. There are other sources as well that you can avail yourself of. And this is one of the roles that IDB or any other multilateral bank does for stakeholders in the region. So from where I sit, we do have an arm of the IDB Invest Group, but it also exists on a public side in the IDB where we provide technical capacity or technical assistance. And so that lack of information that may be nascent within a particular company, we try to bring that out as best as possible to make the life of an SMP or another party that's providing the second party opinion, we try to make it as easy for them to take advantage of what are local nuances sometimes. And so therefore the advisory work is really sort of building the capacity within organizations to build that resource, that information base within the company, so that it can be then shared with stakeholders, regulators, state agencies, as well as market participants. So that's one aspect. And we do that essentially during the life of the project, but we can also do it standalone, so we're building capacity through the evolutionary stage of companies and the bond market cycle activity. And then also, I don't think you can discount the availability of other players or your counterparts within the industry, where you can just simply pick up the phone and ask a question, how do you do this? What should I be aware of? What can I avail myself of? Where can I go and get information? And that can happen organically by just picking up the phone. And I hate to do this to Brent McPhee at TTMB, but if you want to call his organization and ask him, I'm almost sure he'd be willing and interested to help you in that regard. But we do other things as well, where we put on conferences, and I see Ari here from Republic Bank. They would have put on their sustainability conference a couple of years ago, And so therefore you have these opportunities throughout the length and breadth of not just Trinidad, but throughout the region of Latin America, where you can tap into informational sources to get as much as you can. What we did, one thing we did last year that we thought was very, very useful was in the Jamaican context, we actually worked with the Jamaican Stock Exchange and we put out what is called a GSS guide. So it's essentially a framework that is ready built for the Jamaican landscape that is meant to encourage players to come to the capital markets and issue. And so therefore, it would be interesting for us to see whether we can do something similar in Trinidad and the wider Caribbean region to sort of, at the end of the day, crowd in as much as an investment in this part of the world to facilitate green infrastructure investments through the bond and capital markets.
Okay. Thanks so much. So since Johnson took the longest, I'll ask him the last question for this part of the panel. You know, Johnson, we were talking about this, you know, working in this space, coming to maybe this understanding of bonds a little late. You know, Tobias was talking about their work with the credit unions and how this is kind of citizen-driven investment. So, you know, IAMovement started basically as a bunch of like rowdy young people trying to make a change at the grassroots level up. What do you think needs to happen to drive home the understanding and appreciation and sort of advocacy for this type of financing, particularly in the sort of civil society, you know, environmental sustainability project space locally?
Thanks, Omar. Yeah, well, I mean, I would actually say, I think most of the advocacy, you know, it's good to raise awareness among civil society, but I would actually say most of the advocacy, I think, really needs to happen towards the higher levels. I mean, it's good, of course, to do what we have found, that's the approach we took from the beginning, is, you know, people used to ask us when we had our conversations, are you speaking to the government? Because they would constantly see us speaking about these matters. And what we would always say is, we're speaking to you, you know? And the reason is because we believe that the more people that know these things, is the more that, obviously, higher levels listen and that kind of thing. And eventually, you wind up in places like this, like in this room, where we have the chance to communicate with government and so on. So I guess the reason I'm just saying that is I do actually think we're at the level now where the greater advocacy is needed towards the government levels, towards the key partners like the IDBs that can help facilitate these types of things. Banks as well, you know, in my presentation you saw, and I wanted to kind of start with that, what is a bond? But to really kind of clarify, because a lot of people, as you said, people don't know what bonds are, you know? But it's really often governments or very large corporations that issue them. So if we're talking about some of these solutions, we're talking about government, you know, at least for some of these big national solutions like green infrastructure. So, you know, that's the kind of first thing, but the next thing I'll just say to that is I think we're at a ripe time. Ripe is the word I will use, you know. I think that this room shows it, a lot of the interest and energy shows it. But where, you know, we come from this oil and gas background, and we can be grateful, proud, all of those things for that. It's in our blood, so to speak. But it sort of positioned us for a long time of thinking, we're oil and gas people, therefore we can't be green people. You know? We can't be green environmental people. But as energy leaders, why can't we be energy leaders for all energy? Why can't we take that hat and that badge of pride we wear and become leaders for all energy efficiency, renewables, etc.? So it's just to show that we really do have the opportunity. We don't need to keep, I'm saying it because it's a cultural thing, to keep a bit of a closed mind to that possibility of us expanding into a space and becoming leaders in that space. And particularly, you know, I mentioned energy there, but in my presentation, you know, that quick little feel through I wanted to give with forests, let's say, to see the real values of water that is not running into the cities and flooding and is going into the ground and that kind of thing. You know, engineers, and I am an engineer, but I just mean to say very quickly learn about all the cement, concrete, steel. That's somewhat straightforward stuff. That's math, you know, that kind of thing. When you get into the green space, it's a lot more iterative and estimations, but nonetheless, there is engineering behind it, an actual specialist. So I just want to kind of end by saying that there is something out there you can look up called ecosystem value. most people who live in contact with the land have known that for a long time. But us in the kind of business world, if you will, are, you know, putting this monetary value. It's just to say you absolutely can now start to put very real value, that you can develop proposals and have a very real and very high ecosystem value that is monetarily showcasing a very significant return on investment when you're talking about water, job creation, disaster, you know, that type of thing. And I'll just end by already saying that I think as much, you know, we're waking up environmentally, but the economics continues to drive. So I think it's about us making that economic case to show the return on investment, because I do believe that the right government officials, seeing that before them, seeing all the pluses, the green, the this and that, but seeing the economic benefits, I believe they will do it, you know?
Yeah. Great, thanks so much. So we have those mics placed around the room. If we have any burning questions from our audience, please just find the closest mic. And if it's a general question, you can just say so you can direct it to a specific person.
Okay. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am here today as an environmental economist. That in dinosaur days when I got my degree, people said, well, why would you want to count environmental attributes? Who wants to know that? And couldn't find a job and ended up in a different space. But I context that to say, what do you think is the role in education from the point of view of skill sets that are required to drive this work? I'm heading up a project, and I spent 18 months trying to hire someone to lead on resilience finance. And I am going to develop a curriculum to graduate some people, to support governments, but I would love to hear your perspectives on what skill sets are needed to drive this revolution. Thank you.
Thanks. And can we just take that one more, and then we can answer as a group.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Omar. Rudolph Hanamji, I am the chair of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce's ESG and Sustainability Committee. Full disclosure, I began my career as a human rights advocate, so this I have a particular bias towards, and it's not always easy to navigate in the private sector. But I'm giving you all a golden opportunity here because I'm meeting this afternoon with the committee to actually define what we want to do for the rest of the year in the ESG and sustainability space. If I were to ask each of you, you probably have had this thought ever so often, or maybe off the top of your mind right now. If you can direct the private sector to come up with a very specific initiative that you've always wanted to see the private sector undertake to advance this agenda, what would each of you give me to make a note as that burning desire that you have? And I will just close by saying, I am proud as a citizen that the private sector, for the most part, is actually very positive and engaged around these issues, but they are finding it difficult to navigate the space because that balance between people, profit, and planet, as Troy was alluding, is not always an easy one, even at an individual level. So please, I would love to take this afternoon back from each of you. What is that initiative you'd like the private sector to undertake? And we'll do our best to get them to do just that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, no hands, right. So we have that first question about perceptions around capacity gaps and so on. And then maybe like a round table, quick, Willy Wonka kind of wish that you can take forward. So who wants to go first with the capacity constraints in the region?
Maybe I could try.
Yeah.
And Liz, I think your name is, sorry? Pat, sorry, my apologies, Pat. So I'm like you, I'm a dinosaur as well. I did my degree years ago. And so I think you want to have essentially someone to work with, but I think what really drives your advancement in this space is really passion. I'm an old school banker, pursuing the almighty profit that I think Troy would have spoken about. But then I woke up, and I love what I do now, but I still get to use all my skills. So I'm a sort of mix between dark side and light side, for all my Trekkie fans out there, Star Wars fans out there. So it really is passion. a lot of it isn't really learned in school as yet. I think that's now evolving. But you have to find like-minded persons that are willing and that are really excited about this space. I wish you well in terms of the persons that you look for, but attending conferences like this, you'll be surprised that persons will come up to you afterwards and say, listen, how do I get in touch with you? How can I take this thing forward? How can we start a conversation? And I think that's kind of where you really get the most bang for the buck.
Anyone else?
Yeah, maybe I can take the next. So I would say if you're starting to develop a curriculum for an entire, is it a program, a certificate program, or a degree program? Could be anything. Well, I've done it for UE Open Campus. About 2 years ago, we developed a certificate program in sustainable cocoa value chain management, and we integrated sustainability, sort of ESG factors along the line, right? So the approach that we had was to let sustainability permeate the entire curriculum, right? So not have it as a standalone element, but rather to inform and to work together with the facilitators to understand the concept and how it impacts each one of the modules. But with respect to your question in terms of capacity, I think, as I mentioned earlier, climate risk screening, climate risk vulnerability assessments are definitely an important aspect to start with because they will impact any operation in the medium and long term. So that will be something to start with. But I'll be happy to also have a conversation with you later on to explore this further.
Yeah. And maybe, yeah.
Just a quick take for me. I know we want to keep it moving. I think a really valuable skill in this space is being able to speak 2 languages, the language of traditional finance and the language of green and environmentalism. I know when S&P, a very kind of traditional finance credit ratings agency, started entering into the space of sustainability, we were exposed to all of these great climate experts, and we didn't always speak their language, and they didn't always speak ours, and now we've evolved to a place where we're really getting more comfortable with each other's language. But finding that ability for a financial analyst to understand the importance of soil and an environmental analyst to understand what a bond is, this is really important, and I think increasingly important to be able to wear multiple hats and speak these 2 languages.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So Jonathan, I'll have you as the founder of IAMovement and so on. I think, do you have any front of your mind ideas for investable things that Mr. Hanamaji can take to the chamber?
Sure, but I also do have a quick response for Pat.
Sure.
But yeah, so just Pat, in terms of skill sets, I would say something I think is of very high importance and really should be starting to come forward, I think at university and school levels as well, is a greater understanding of ecosystem value. That is a whole area of study where they're beginning to really, people are getting those skill sets to put actual economic value on that, if you will, so that quote unquote the economic people can start comparing apples with apples. But, and in that vein, again, sometimes it's sad to do that, to think of nature as money, but at the end of the day, it has that very real value, And within that, I would actually specify hydrologists of a very high importance, because water is such a fundamental thing. It's going to be a huge part of challenges in the future as well. And it's also something that's very quickly, quote unquote, monetizable in terms of the real cost associated with supplying water and challenges with not having water. So if we're able to put real numbers on these things and say this project is going to give X amount of value and it can be proven, that can very quickly, I think, help change minds, Of course, there's other ecosystem values, but I just wanted to speak kind of water as a kind of a key one. Yeah, and then to Rudy, this is a bit of a hard sell, but nonetheless, I think very important. It's been said for a long time, and Troy was speaking to it in a very large way this morning, but I really think maybe we should take the mantle, if you will, and begin to hammer it home, which is stop putting only profit first. And that might sound difficult or weird to hear, But really and truly, how much more money do you actually need in your bank account if you have everything that you need? And people can look at it many different ways. They could look at the billionaires, but the point is the companies that have enough, how can you start to think that we can bring something else into the conversation? Let's not put that only at the very top, because if we truly want to talk about our future generations and your kids' kids to have anything there, just please bring that into the conversation and give it similar importance. And sometimes you'll actually find, again, with the bundle of benefits, you will see the economic benefits. So put your bright minds as well to look at that and pull those out and show you the economic benefits that can come from doing these things, you know? But it does take that effort and decision within the company organization to have someone doing that and presenting that for people to understand, you know? I think for them to be able to help make those decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So I think this has been quite a good panel. You know, I think there's quite a lot of gloomy things in the world. And, you know, there's quite a lot of conversation about where shifts in policies might take markets and interest in different parts of the market. But I think we have quite a good catalyzing point here. And I think we have quite a lot of interest in keeping this sort of progressive journey going forward. And I think that's a good sign for everyone in this room. So thanks everyone again. Thanks to Stephan, Liz, Jonathan, and Tobias